Good morning. I'm Chris Brown from Air Studies Capital. Thank you all for being here. This is truly a joy to present to such an amazing group of investors, and thank you for putting this together. It's really special. Disclosure, it's Borat reference, not a typo. So Air Studies Capital, we're based in Toledo, founded in August 2008. Predominantly bottoms up, US microcap, and we've done pretty well so far, pretty small though. All right, so as I was preparing for this talk, I thought about an experience I had where I had a choice to go to Fermilab for a couple weeks or Disney World for 1 week. And I chose to go to Fermilab. And I'm glad that I did. And the thing that I got out of Fermilab is basically the physics chops to give this talk today. So the company I'm talking about is kind of a physics-based company. And you might have said, like, why is a biology major from Toledo talking to me about physics? So the thing on the top left there is a photomultiplier tube base. And I actually made one of those. So the thing on the bottom is helps detect particles. So how much would you pay for this business? Revenue is consistently less than $3 million, operating income of negative $50 million, and shares outstanding constantly increasing. Anyone? This keeps up, it's a zero, right? All right, so talk today is on Energous Corporation. It's a worthless equity that's been hyped to a valuation of $500 million. A lot of the valuation gain happened December 27th and 28th when there was an FCC approval for one of their products that the company just horrifically misrepresented. You can see that the big pop in price was not actually a short squeeze. Shorts like us actually increased our position on the event. What happened was 5 times the float traded in 2 days, mainly from retail investors. There's still very low institutional participation in the stock. So how did this terrible company's stock get so high? One, the CEO pretty much lies all the time. 2, there's some partners that give the company validation. So the fellow on the left there is Marty Cooper. He's the father of the cell phone. And the fellow on the right is a former FCC commissioner who now works for Cooley, who's been paid big bucks by the company to say nice things about them. They also have a partnership with Dialog, who's basically given the exclusive right to manufacture chips for the company in exchange for purchasing some stock and warrants into under-the-market deals. And then Apple is their most intensely publicized partnership, and we'll talk about that on the next page. Most importantly, there's been a lot of fake news around this company. So, for example, New York Post saying, now you can charge your phone from up to 3 feet away. You can't, and we'll talk about that. So if Energous is so bad, why did Apple partner with them? And it basically comes down to large tech companies liking call options that are almost free. So Apple's paid Energous very little money. And Energous, on the other hand, is completely locked up in several important product categories. So cell phones, smartwatches, Energous can't engage with anyone who's a competitor to Apple in those. How long does the agreement last? It's at least several years. And I asked the CEO one-on-one, what if Apple decides not to release a product, but they don't tell you that, and you're just locked up until the end? And his response was simply, they wouldn't do that. All right, so even our firm bought the Energous IPO. Why? It was a really good story. We knew people would like the story, and we figured it would take them a while to catch on to the fact that this is something that can't technically be done. However, since the IPO, the company's up almost tenfold, and it's shown very little progress. All right, so what do they promise to do? Basically, it's RF or microwave-based wireless charging at a distance, and they say they have a novel approach to this. Basically, they claim to be able to create packets of energy around your device at a distance. When they were coming public, they said their product was too large to be incorporated in commercial devices, but they'd fix that. And what they promised is that they would be able to give you 1.5 watts at 30 feet. All right. That is incredibly hard to do. This is the Freeze equation, and basically what it shows is the power transmitted is inversely proportional to the square of the distance. So if you have adequate power at 3 centimeters, to get adequate power at 3 meters, you need 10,000 times as much power. All right, it can be done. The physics behind this is not new, and the technology is not new. So this is a 1975 experiment that NASA did, and they basically set up this huge antenna array and sent 34,000 watts of power nearly a mile. The catch to this is they had a 26-meter transmitting antenna, and the transmitting antenna is many multiples of the wavelength of the energy they were sending. And they also had a huge receiver. They had 17 square meters of receiving elements. Obviously, you would not have wanted to be in the middle of this beam or you'd have been cooked. All right, so in addition to being large, the antennas have to line up perfectly. If you're off by 1 degree left or right, or if you're off by 1 degree up or down, you basically receive almost no power whatsoever. All right, so anyhow, surprisingly, Energous is not using large, highly directional antennas. Energous' FCC approval is for 913 megahertz, which is a wavelength of 33 centimeters. So the catch is, to do this in a highly directional fashion, you'd have to have a sending antenna that was several times the wavelength. And you can imagine having a few of these in your living room. It's just not very practical. So what is the company's alleged secret sauce? Well, what they talk about is controlling the phase and amplitude of the RF power to form constructive and destructive interference, generating pockets of energy in a 3D space. So the term pockets of energy doesn't mean anything to physicists, and it doesn't mean anything to people in the space. It's just a term they made up. So basically, if you look through their patent documents, pocket forming is just another way of saying constructive interference. And to try to overcome a 10,000-fold drop in power using constructive interference is stupid, and here's why. Okay, so this is constructive interference. It's 1 plus 1 equals 2. If you have two waves perfectly in phase, the amplitude of one adds to the amplitude of the other. So let's say that Energous is lucky enough to get 5 waves perfectly in phase. They can't do this, by the way, but let's say they could get 5 waves perfectly in phase at 4 meters away, and each of those waves was able to generate 0.001 watts of power. Well, I think everyone in this room knows 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 5. You square the amplitude for the power, and you still end up with a whopping 0.0025 watts of power, which is practically nothing. All right, obviously, you can't just crank up the energy. Living things suffer damage when they're exposed to microwave energy, so there's very strict FCC limits on how much you can be exposed to. All right, so here's why the stock really got going. You know, they tell this lie again and again and again and again, and they got this FCC approval, and basically all the major media picked this up and thought, wow, it's really happening. And the reason the media thought it was happening was the company gave them the very strong indication that this was some magical important thing. CEO talked about a new era for electronics as a whole. Their former FCC commissioner on the payroll said that Energous has achieved something historic. This is a historic day in history, and all sorts of rosy stuff. And then 30 minutes into the Q&A, someone actually asked the CEO, well, how much power did this actually generate?
Power is not that significant.
That was the power is not that significant. All right, so that kind of a complicated slide, but this is really worth understanding. Investors who are on the long side, to Sam's point that longs don't know what they own sometimes. No one knows exactly how much energy was delivered in the test, but you can extrapolate it from the FCC documents. So there's a unique feature of the device where the thing that's being charged, if it receives less than 30 milliwatts from the sending device, it shuts off. So we know in the FCC test that the very edge of the charging radius is where 30 milliwatts was being received. So if you kind of look at the bottom of the blue edge of what's being charged, that's where 30 milliwatts is being received. All right, you can work backwards from the freeze equation and also from some of the other data in the FCC filings, and you can see how much is being received. So for example, at 18 inches away, you're getting 120 milliwatts or not much. And I should mention very importantly, that's only within about a 70-degree radius. So within a 200, within the other 200 and, sorry, bad at math right now, you can't get any power whatsoever. And if you're outside of 38 inches in any direction, you can't get any power whatsoever.
The power is not that significant.
Oh, that was better, thank you. All right. So how long would this product take to charge your iPhone? If you were 9 inches, if your phone was 9 inches away from the sender, it would take about a day. If you're 18 inches away, it would take 4 days, and that's only if your phone was in some sort of magical power saving mode, because your phone would be burning power faster than it would be charging. At 27 inches away, it's until you and Taylor Swift get back together, which, as you know, is never, ever, ever. So this is, the company would say this is just a prototype to get FCC approval. We can add power to this. In reality, they can't. So here's how they did the safety testing. If you are within 50 centimeters of the device and there's movement there, the charging automatically stops. So what the FCC said is, well, we don't have to test your safety within 50 centimeters. We'll test it at 50 centimeters or farther out. So it's about 20 inches. So they measured radiation exposure at 20 inches. Peak SAR received was 0.97 watts per kilogram against a limit of 1.6. So it's more than halfway there. Average exposure 0.043 versus the limit of 0.08. Again, more than halfway there. So the takeaway is if Energous had doubled the power in this test, they would have failed and not received certification. And it would have still taken 2 days to charge your cell phone from 18 inches away from the device. So this is not something anyone would ever want to buy. All right, why is the safety data so horrible? This is basically what the focus pocket looks like. All right, focus pockets are a lie. They aren't focused and they aren't pockets. This is all from the FCC data. The device in each of these pictures is where the black star is, and some of them are hard to see, so put a white circle around those. So that's where the most power should be going to. The largest energy, however, is where the white arrow is. And you can see that the device is sending a massive amount of energy to places that aren't where the device is. So basically, the device is receiving tenfold less energy. There's no focus pocket. This thing is just blasting out a lot of microwaves everywhere around it, or actually a little bit of microwaves everywhere around it. And a tiny little trickle is actually making it to your device. There's no focus. This is totally made up. The only pockets that management is focused on are their own. Insider sales have been $16 million in the last year, and that doesn't include the CTO who recently left the company. His family had a lot of stock, and they could be selling without even having to file. All right, Energous has no viable commercial niche. The Qi standard some of you are familiar with, which is magnetic induction, is faster, it's non-radiative, so it's safer, and there's already 1,000 products in the market. Energous, in terms of near-field charging, is at a huge disadvantage. Their power is lower and they're much less safer. Interestingly, there's a company that is nearly a clone of Energous on the market. It's called PowerCast, and you've probably never heard of it. It actually got almost the same FCC approval that Energous did on the same day that Energous did, and there was basically no media coverage about it whatsoever. And the reason is the PowerCast CEO is not a great big liar. So PowerCast tells you up front that the available energy after conversion should be in the low milliwatt to microwatt range. All right, so it's hard to make a product when you'd have to break the laws of physics to do so, but at least Energous has made their products invisible. This is the router that was supposed to come out in 2016. Obviously, it doesn't exist. Mini Watt Up was supposed to be here in 2016. It doesn't exist. Check out all these cool products from CES in 2017. There's supposed to be 5 consumer devices and 1 medical device. No, no, and no. They announced 6 products, 0 have successfully made it to market. CES 2018, maybe this year will be different. So this is basically a Fitbit for your groin. I don't know why anyone needs that. But the company that launched it, Mayance, made a great big deal about the cool wireless charging. And sure enough, as of April, they've now removed all mentions of wireless charging from their site. Take-home message number 1. The people who do publicity and media for Energous have done an utterly brilliant job marketing vaporware. If you need marketing, you should hire them. So if there's any journalists in the audience who want to figure out why Ajit Pai, the standing FCC chairman, is pumping this company so hard, that would be a really great thing to investigate. Take-home message number 2. The advance upon which Energous was founded, the so-called pocket forming, is a complete baffle them with bullshit way of saying constructive interference. It's not an advance, it's not helpful, it doesn't solve any problems. The reason that we don't transmit large amounts of RF are the same as they've always been. Safety limitations, equipment cost and size, and poor efficiency. It's the same as it's been for decades. Take-home message number 3, Energous is a fraud, one which is burning a lot of cash and will run out of money. The company has no chance of making a commercially successful product, and we fully expect the company will go to 0. I have 45 seconds left, so I have time to take one question if anyone wants. Yes?
How do you navigate the 88% borrower?
Yeah, it's really tough. So from time to time, the volatility in the options has been extremely high, and it's been extremely high even a couple years out. So this is one where rather than getting chewed up in borrow every month and hoping that this month is the time for the catalyst, you can sell very long-dated calls and just play it that way. Because when you sell long-dated calls, one thing you have on your side is the company is going to be constantly issuing stock. So even if it pops, it won't pop for very long. And we all know in the long run where this company ends up. All right, thank you all very much.
Chris.